everyone. Welcome back to the Brick City Brown Chick Show. And this week, I want to talk about the difference between accountability and blame. I think those are things that people mix up, mess up, conflate to being the same thing, and they're actually not, right? Accountability is taking responsibility for your thoughts, deeds, and actions, or holding someone else responsible for their thoughts, deeds, and actions. Blame is just you want to be able to take whatever's bothering you or whatever happened to you and place it on another person, being your parents or your siblings or your spouse, and that alleviates your responsibility for dealing with it. Now, what do I mean specifically? I heard an interesting discussion last week, Thanksgiving week, about people who were disassociating themselves from their family, mostly parents, siblings, aunts and uncles, other relatives, who voted for the incoming president as opposed to Kamala Harris. And a lot of the questions around this topic that came from the people who were being disassociated with were, you're seriously going to break up our family over politics? Like, is that really what you're about to do? And the response of most of the people who are doing the disassociating said, no, I'm not breaking our family up over politics. You did that. You did that by the choice you made in voting for this election. You voted against my interests, the interests of my children, or you even voted against your own interest in many cases. And that is about you as a person and not about politics. And I've decided that I don't want to have anything to do with you. So, is that holding people accountable for the actions they took? It absolutely is. Is that blaming those people for the actions they took? It's not. It's a person saying, this is the choice you made. You're good with that choice. Great. I am not good with that choice. And therefore, I will not associate with you. I will not sit down to dinner. I will not break bread with you. I don't want anything to do with you because you've shown me who you really are. Now, people have argued back and forth about whether this is valid or a good thing or not a good thing. I heard another discussion last week about wives and girlfriends who are leaving the men in their lives because their men also voted for the incoming president. And the women have realized that this is not a person they want to be married to or be with, and they have decided to wash their hands and walk away. This is related to the topic I spoke of last week on no fault divorce, as people are realizing that they are with someone that they don't want to be with, and they understand that now is the time for them to walk away while they still can. I know the issue of accountability and blame is a big one for Gen Z, for people in their late teens and early to mid 20s. They have felt like their parents, which are people of my generation for the most part, are Gen X, did not listen to them, did not hear them when they were younger, or abuse them, either mentally, physically, or emotionally. And they have decided now that they are adults and they no longer live in their parents' house that they don't want a relationship with their parents. Is that a drastic way to feel or a drastic action to take? It absolutely is. But you have to understand that people take action or take an action like that when they feel there is no other choice or no other option. People who know me well know that I have a saying that goes, the statute of limitations for blaming your parents for your SHIT is 25. Now, where did I come up with that? That's something I made up, but it's something that I've always believed. I believe that once you hit your mid 20s, you are responsible for your SHIT. That does not mean that you don't have the right to be upset with your parents, to be frustrated with your parents, to feel like your parents did you wrong. What it does mean is if you need to go to therapy about it, go. If you need to scream it out, yell it out, sit down with your parents and have it out, do that. But you need to be accountable for your thoughts and feelings and hold your parents accountable for what they did. Is that always going to look like disowning your parents and wanting nothing to do with them? No, it's not always going to look like that. But is it going to be a painful process for you and for your parents? It absolutely is. Now, I speak about this from the vantage point of experience, right? I am a 54-year-old Gen X Black woman. I grew up with both my parents, and while my parents were in sync on a lot of issues, especially issues related to me, their only child, they were also very different in certain ways, especially in their coping mechanisms. My father was an introvert. He was a serious person. He took things in and would think about them and mull them over and decide what he was going to do about things. My mother was much more reactionary. My mother was all about the moment and the action, and we're going to deal with this right now. Go, 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 go. She is now 90 years old, and she's still a lot like that. We all are like, yeah, this is who B is, and everybody's just got to roll with it. I, as the child of these two people, always felt like I was kind of stuck in the middle. And I'm sure a lot of kids feel like that. It's like your mother wants to do things one way, your father wants to do things a different way. But as is true in most households, not just Black households, but households in general, my mother ruled the roost, right? Like she was the one who took the actions in terms of she put me in ballet classes, she put me in cheerleading. She was mom's taxi. She took me hither, dither, and yon. And so when it got right down to it, if I'd ask her to do something, she would always say, ask your father. Like those are the first words out of her mouth. And then I would go ask my father, and he would say, ask your mother. And so, of course, I got to an age where I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to do this while they're in the room together so I don't have to play this back and forth game. But at the end of the day, if my mother said, no, I was not allowed to do X, my father was not going to go against her. That is not how they worked. They were a true team. Now, as I got older, my father died when I was 17, so I was a high school senior, and that was a super traumatic time in my life. But as I got into my 20s, my relationship with my mother, which was always, I guess strained is a good word. My mother and I were never close. And that's something that people in my family, especially, always feel like, well, you shouldn't say that. I'm like, why shouldn't I say it? It's true. I'm like, but don't put your business on Front Street. Don't tell the world that that's how it is. I'm like, okay, but that's how it is. This is my truth and no one else's. So that's the truth. When I was born, my mother had wanted a boy, and my father wanted a girl. And so I was a girl. And I really do think that was the genesis, that was the beginning of the strain in my relationship with my mother. Now, did either of us have a choice in that situation? Absolutely not. I was the baby. I showed up. Yeah, female. Here we are. Could my mother help the fact that her feelings were that she wanted a son? Probably not. So we both had to deal with that. How we chose to deal with it was a long and winding road. In a lot of cases in my childhood, my mother wanted me to do things that I did not have any interest in doing. For example, my mother wanted me to learn to play the piano. I had no interest in playing the piano. What I wanted to play was the guitar. Now, understand when I grew up, Tracy Chapman was like the rock star, rock star. And my mother had an instinct, I guess we'll call it, that Tracy Chapman was a lesbian. Okay, Tracy Chapman is in fact a lesbian, but as a 15, 16-year-old girl, I A, didn't care, and B, it didn't matter to me. But it mattered to my mother. And my mother, on some level, was terrified that if I took up the guitar, I would become a lesbian. She somehow conflated those two things. And I think that's really generational. I don't think that's unusual for parents of that time. So she absolutely did not want me to play the guitar. That was not happening. But her replacement was she wanted me to play the piano. I made it abundantly clear that I had zero interest in playing the piano. But dealing with my mother, that's not how her mind worked. Her mind was, you are my child. I am the parent. Therefore, I get to tell you what you will and will not do. The major problem with that thinking was that she and my father raised me to be an independent thinker and to be someone who makes it very clear what they are willing to do and what they are not willing to do. What I was supposed to interpret as a child that I now understand as an adult was you can be independent, and we want you to be independent with everybody except your parents, specifically your mother. But I didn't understand that. All I understood was I had been raised to be an independent person, and I was not going to play the piano because I did not want to play the piano. Now, mind you, she was having this argument with like a 14-year-old. I was not a small child. But she just went right on her merry way and bought a used piano and brought it into the house. And somehow she thought the presence of this piano, or the fact that she had spent her money on it, would encourage me to learn to play the piano. I do not play the piano, and I never have. And that was one of those battleground line in the sand moments in my teenage years where I was just convinced that she was not listening and didn't get it. And she was convinced that I was being a stubborn pain in the butt and that I didn't get it. There are a myriad of examples like that from my childhood. Places where my mother decided she wanted me to do X, and I decided I was not doing X, I was doing Y. She wanted me to be a cheerleader. I did it for like a year and a half, and then I broke my ankle, and then said I wasn't doing it anymore. I was done. She wanted me to join the school softball team. I just flat out refused. I joined the school newspaper instead. So there were lots of times that we went totally round and round. And there were a few knockdown, drag out, not physical fights, but just arguments where we were just, neither of us was going to give an inch. And in those situations, my father was the peacemaker. He was always the person who'd step between us and say, okay, we're not doing this. Like, go to your respective corners and calm down. That was really his role in our family. So when he died, those type of arguments with my mother got ratcheted up. Even though I was 17 when he died and I was almost grown, but not quite, she had very strong opinions about where I should go to college, what I should major in, and then when I graduated, where I should live. She just had a string of opinions. As an 18 and then 20 and then 25-year-old woman, I found her, we'll call it feedback, super irritating. I really did. I felt like I was a grown person and that she needed to back off, and that she and my father had raised me to be a strong, independent woman, and that she needed to have the faith in me that I would do what I needed to do, and more importantly, what I wanted to do. What I have come to understand with 30 years of wisdom and hindsight is what my mother wanted essentially was a clone of her. She wanted a child who would do and be everything she never got to do and be. My mother is the oldest of 10 children. My grandparents were sharecroppers. As I always say when I use that word, if you don't know what it means, look it up. And they were poor in the South in the 1950s. So lots of things my mother wanted to do: be a cheerleader, play the piano, join a sorority, all these types of things she never got to do because she didn't have the money to do them. She wanted me to do. Where the rubber met the road on that is she wanted me to do them regardless of whether I wanted to do them or not. And that was always our sticking point. She believed that as her child, I should do things her way, even when I was a grown up. And that's not who I am. That's not how I'm wired. And frankly, that's not the person she and my father raised. And she always had a disconnect with those two things. And it went on for years. When I got married, she was not crazy about the fact initially that my husband was white. Took her a long time to come to Jesus about that. She thought that he and I should move to Atlanta because when we got married 25 years ago, Atlanta was the mecca for like young black professional people. And what I always said to her is, Mom, where are my white husband and I supposed to live in Atlanta? Because we can't live in the suburbs because people still have issues. So she wanted us to do that. She wanted me to be an engineer. Now, I have no engineering aptitude whatsoever. I got through geometry and trigonometry and algebra 1 and 2, and I was grateful to leave math behind and never deal with it again. So the idea of like calculus and physics, that wasn't happening. But that didn't change the fact that that's what she wanted me to be. So I had to have a serious sit down conversation with her just a few years ago. I was in my late 40s. And it was a conversation where we really did hash out all of our long pent up feelings about each other. And it was a very honest conversation, probably not a conversation that most people have ever had or will ever have with either of their parents. But I really did just want to get it all out and tell her that, I spent probably half my life at that point blaming her for the issues in our relationship. And I finally had to come to accept that putting all the blame on her or putting blame on her, period, was pointless. It was useless. There was no changing the past. And so I had to come to a place where I let her know that I no longer blamed her, that I held her accountable for her part of our relationship, but I also held myself accountable for my part of our relationship. Is our relationship better today? It is. Is she different than she used to be? No. Am I different than I used to be? No. What's happened is we're both fully grown women now. I am a middle-aged woman. She is an elderly woman. We've had to accept that we are always going to be very different people. And we're going to walk in and through the world as those different people. Something I used to say in my 20s that people in my family were horrified by, but I still say, because it's true, is that my mother and I love each other because we have to, because we're supposed to, because we're mother and daughter. But the truth is, if we just met in the everyday world, we're not the kind of women who would choose to be friends. And that's true, and that's real, and that's honest. And at the end of the day, all I can ask for is honesty. That is all I can ask for. So I have followed my own advice. I have long since stopped playing the blame game around my mother and around her actions and her desires about what I would do and be throughout my childhood. Does that mean that I am no longer hurt by what happened? It does not mean that. There's always going to be some hurt there. There's always going to be some woulda, coulda, shoulda. Or, if she had been a different type of person, maybe our relationship would be better, would be different. But I don't dwell on that because it's not possible. There's no way to go back in time and fix it or change it or make things different. So it really is about accepting what is instead of spending your time wishing and hoping and praying for what will never be. It's about being realistic. And at the end of the day, I am nothing if not realistic. So what I want to let everybody know is blame is a knee-jerk reaction. It is human. It is instinct. Nobody wants to deal with their own SHIT. Nobody wants to be annoyed or bothered or frustrated or held accountable for the things they've done. But accountability is a true sign of maturity. Being able to sit with yourself and accept the choices you've made and how those choices have affected your life is paramount to being able to see things differently and to make different choices. There's an old saying that if you keep doing what you've always done, you'll keep getting what you've always gotten. And so accountability is really about changing that narrative and ensuring that as you move forward in the world, you can move forward in a way that will both make you a better person and will also make you a person who is comfortable in your own skin and knows your boundaries and your limitations and is not bothered by people who refuse to accept those. It's about being able to accept yourself and knowing that you make the best decisions for you. Because at the end of the day, you are the only person over which you have any control. I want to thank everybody for joining me for the podcast this week. If you are not subscribed to this page, please subscribe. There's a button probably right below me right now that says subscribe. It will let you know whenever I upload new content. I do this weekly, so you'll be able to be one of the first people to see my new episodes. Take care, everybody, and I will see you again next week. Bye-bye.